was nothing more than a shadow behind my husband, the man praised for the very plans I had written myself. In his family's eyes, I was just someone who got lucky, a mere diversity quota to be mocked. And even at lavish parties, my husband never hesitated to introduce me as nothing more than the one who kept the kitchen, kept the bed. But then, one moment changed everything. A seemingly harmless remark became the spark that dragged the entire truth into the light. I chose silence no longer. And once the truth was exposed, not only did my marriage collapse, but those who had once belittled me were forced to bow their heads before justice. Chapter 1. The humiliating dinner. I still remember that night vividly, a night I had awaited with every ounce of hope for recognition, only for it to turn into a wound carved deep into my pride. It was the evening I officially announced to my husband's family that I had been promoted, an opportunity I had worked tirelessly for over so many years to finally achieve. I thought at the very least this time they would be proud, but my biggest mistake was daring to hope. That evening took place at an upscale Italian restaurant, Bella Vista, the place Stephanie, my husband's aunt, always chose for family gatherings. Golden lights cast down over tables draped in white cloths, crystal glasses glittered, polished silverware gleamed, as if the place existed solely to make her venomous words echo all the clearer. The moment I sat down, Stephanie looked me up and down, her lips curling slightly. "Oh, so they finally gave you a real job." Her voice rose loud enough for the whole table to hear. Not a congratulation, not a trace of joy, only icy mockery. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law Haley let out a dry laugh and added, "Perhaps they've lowered the hiring standards." The whole table chuckled. The clinking of cutlery against plates seemed to punctuate each insult. I bit my lip hard, forcing a strained smile clinging to composure. In that instant, I turned to my husband, Grant, hoping he would speak up for me. But all I received was his hand brushing mine under the table, a faint squeeze, as if to remind me, let it go, don't react. But why was I always the one who had to let it go? I steadied my voice and said I was just appointed as regional director. I'll be overseeing the entire development division on the West Coast. This is a major step forward in my career. I thought at least a title like that would earn respect. Instead, Haley offered a false smile and asked, "Oh, wonderful. But what about your predecessor retired or simply moved elsewhere?" The question sounded polite, but I knew its edge. She meant that I was chosen only to fill a vacant seat, not because I truly deserved it. I drew a deep breath, trying to clarify no. This is a newly created role as the company expands. Revenue has grown by more than 30% in the past 18 months, and they needed someone to lead the process. Stephanie echoed mockingly, dragging out her words, 30%. She tapped her fingers against the table, her gaze cutting through me. Impressive, but growth is easy. If you're starting from zero, isn't that right? Again, laughter burst around the table. Each word felt like it stripped bare all my hard work, turning it into a joke. Grant remained silent. I glanced at him, but he only bowed his head toward his bread roll, as if the crumbs there mattered more than his wife being humiliated in public. I had spent the entire week preparing for this dinner. I had envisioned their surprise at hearing the promotion, imagined admiration in their eyes. I had even bought a navy blue blouse, a color I believe was both professional and empowering. But under the golden glow of luxury, I suddenly felt small, like an imposter on a stage far too grand. Haley sipped her wine and smiled. What a progressive age we live in. Now even those who once had no chance can advance thanks to inclusivity policies. I knew what she meant. Those with no chance. That was me, a woman from an ordinary background, educated at a state school, working my way up from the lowest rungs, studying at night to earn my MBA. I clenched my fists beneath the table. My company promotes based on ability, not out of pity or charity, I said, my voice trembling but still firm. Stephanie raised her brows, lips curling. "Oh, of course. I'm sure you've worked very hard. But I can't help but wonder, Are the standards still the same as in our generation? It seems everything is much more flexible now. Flexible in their eyes meant lowered standards, that people like me only got to sit in seats that never truly belonged to us because of diversity policies. Grant finally spoke, but only to smooth things over. Come on, Aunt. We don't know all the details of the promotion, but his words were just fuel to the fire. They weren't a defense of me, only a plea for his aunt not to be too harsh. I forced a weak smile, tried to lift my glass of water, but my hand shook so badly the water spilled onto the tablecloth. In that moment, I felt utterly stripped bare before the crowd, every eye seeing me as nothing but a lucky fraud. I had to excuse myself and retreat to the restroom, the only place I could breathe. In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Eyes reddened, face straining to smile as if apologizing for succeeding. I wondered, when had I allowed others to define my worth? When I returned, the conversation had shifted to Dylan, Stephanie's precious nephew. They praised him endlessly, brilliant, a natural leader, exceptional since childhood. Every compliment for Dylan was a knife turned against me. And you're nothing. I sat in silence, humiliated. Yet in that very instant, another fire flickered inside me. I began to understand these people would never acknowledge me, no matter how hard I worked. And Grant's silence hurt more than any insult. What I didn't know was that at that very dinner, Nicole Richardson, the CEO's wife, had been sitting nearby quietly observing everything. And it was she with a single chilling sentence who laid the foundation for everything that would follow. As Stephanie boasted about Dylan, Nicole set her wine glass down, her voice cold as ice. How interesting, especially since I just received some documents about your nephew this afternoon. Perhaps we should discuss them privately after dinner. The entire table fell silent. I looked up and met her gaze. There was no pity in her eyes, only quiet recognition. That night, I left Bella Vista with a heavy heart, but I didn't know then. It was also the turning point that would unleash a storm, one that would sweep away all those who had ever treated me as nothing more than a shadow. Chapter 2. Stepping into the company and the seeds of suspicion. The following Monday morning, I walked into the headquarters of Richardson Industries with a strange sensation. It felt as though every halogen light above was shining directly onto me, reminding me that I was no longer just another employee. I was the regional director, a title that even I sometimes had to repeat to myself just to believe it was real. But that happiness was quickly overshadowed by the echoes of last night's ridicule. As I walked through the grand lobby, my head held high. Stephanie's words still lingered in my heart. Lowered standards, inclusivity, flexibility. Perhaps that was why I became more aware of the gazes around me. Some colleagues greeted me with the usual politeness, while others whispered quietly. I knew the news of my promotion had already spread. In the corporate world, news always traveled faster than internal emails. My new office wasn't particularly large, but its position was undeniably more prestigious. A glass-paneled room overlooking the bustling avenue, a gleaming walnut desk, a leather swivel chair. Sitting down, I drew in a deep breath and reminded myself, this is my achievement. Not a gift handed down. I earned this through sweat, tears, and countless sleepless nights. But my focus was broken when the office door opened. Dylan walked in, the very nephew Stephanie had praised to the skies, dressed in a brand new suit designer tie, his youthful face radiating a false confidence. He smiled, but there was something in that smile that made my skin crawl, arrogance, shallowness, as though the world had been built solely to lay a red carpet at his feet. Well, I heard you got promoted, Dylan said. Quite impressive, especially given your not-so-special background. The words were both a compliment and a slap. I forced a light smile, unwilling to bicker, though the echoes of last night's insults came rushing back. It seemed that not only at the dinner table, but even here in the company, I was still seen as someone who had merely gotten lucky. I answered calmly, "That's right. and now my responsibility is to oversee all operations on the West Coast. I hope we'll have the chance to work together." Dylan shrugged his eyes, gleaming with a subtle contempt. "Of course. But not everyone is born with a natural talent for leadership like me." He emphasized the word talent, and I almost laughed. The leaders I knew weren't the ones who boasted, but the ones who shouldered responsibility, the ones whose sweat stained the numbers in the reports. He left trailing the scent of expensive cologne while I sat with a lingering sense of unease. A part of me wanted to dismiss it, but another part whispered, "Something isn't right." That day I spent time acquainting myself with my new team. My subordinates seemed surprised, even reserved. They weren't used to seeing me in a managerial role. But the more we talked, the more I realized they respected results. They had seen the reports I'd produced, the deals I'd salvaged, the contracts I'd negotiated to success, and that was the real reason I'd been chosen. In the afternoon, I had a scheduled session with the compliance department, the unit in charge of reviewing ledgers, expenses, and reports. I had volunteered months earlier, using it as a way to learn more. They handed me a thick stack of files, asking me to audit the documents. I flipped through each invoice, each report, every tiny line of print. At first, it was all routine client conferences, business travel costs, dinners with partners. But then, when I reached Dylan's file, I froze. A receipt from a luxury restaurant in New York, over $300. Nothing unusual, except Dylan had been officially recorded as present at the Los Angeles office that very day, with no approved travel. I frowned. Perhaps just a clerical mistake, I told myself. But then next came a hotel receipt in Seattle during the same week. Dylan reported working in San Francisco. Then another restaurant bill, this time in Chicago. 3 receipts, 3 different cities. None of them matched his official travel records. I felt my heartbeat quicken. The lines on the receipts suddenly seemed to glow, signaling something was wrong. A strong instinct told me this wasn't a simple mistake. Dylan, the so-called genius, the natural-born leader, might very well be cheating. I sat still for a few seconds, clutching the file tightly. Just the night before, I had been humiliated because they thought I wasn't worthy of my position. And now here, in this very company, perhaps the true golden boy of their family was the one living a lie. I lifted my gaze through the glass walls of my office. In the distance, Dylan was laughing with a group of colleagues, his eyes shining as though the whole world belonged to him. But I had already seen the first cracks in that flawless facade, and I knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The First Clue. Ever since the day I discovered those strange invoices in Dylan's file, my mind had not known peace. By day, I still attended meetings, signed approvals, exchanged work like any other manager. But whenever I sat alone, those numbers would resurface sharp and undeniable in my thoughts. New York, Chicago, Seattle. 3 cities, 3 expenses, and 1 travel schedule that didn't match at all. I wondered how many people in this company had ever glanced through these invoices. Had anyone else ever questioned them before me? Or was I the only one who cared enough to notice such details? I was not one to jump to conclusions. In work, I always believed in evidence. And if Dylan truly was committing fraud, I needed solid, irrefutable proof. The next day, I returned to the compliance department under the most reasonable pretense that I wanted to gain a deeper understanding of processes to do better in my new role. Janet, a veteran there, smiled warmly. Not many people volunteer to learn compliance. Most find it boring. But you're different. I only smiled back. If Janet knew how my mind was racing with suspicion, she would not think my interest was mere curiosity. I requested a few more files, not just Dylan's, but from several other employees for comparison. As I flipped through them, most invoices aligned perfectly. Travel dates had approvals, destinations were clear, signatures matched properly. Only Dylan's stood out, repeating the same anomalies. One restaurant receipt bore a customer's signature entirely unlike Dylan's handwriting. A hotel invoice listed 2 guests in a room, though Dylan had reported it as a solo business trip. I noted each small detail, secretly snapping photos with my phone whenever no one was looking. Each click of the camera sent my pulse racing, as though I might be caught red-handed at any second. That afternoon, as I returned from compliance to my office, Dylan was waiting at the door, arms crossed, a smirk curling his lips. "I hear you've been taking an interest in little numbers," he drawled. "Trying to impress the higher-ups with a few audit tricks, huh?" I met his eyes, keeping my voice even. "I'm simply doing my job, making sure everything is clear and transparent." Dylan burst out laughing as if I had just told a joke. "Transparent? In a company this big, do you think anyone cares about a few petty invoices? What matters are revenue contracts, profit. The junk you're digging through, no one's paying attention." With that, he walked away. But his words haunted me. He was right in a way. Perhaps no one had paid attention all these years, and that negligence had fed his arrogance. That evening, I returned home unsettled. Grant sat on the sofa, eyes fixed on the TV. I wanted to tell him to say I had uncovered something serious. But then I remembered how he had sat silently through Stephanie and Haley's taunts. How would he react if I said I suspected their golden boy? Would he stand by me, or would he just tell me not to make a fuss? I kept quiet. But silence did not mean surrender. That night when Grant was asleep, I opened my laptop and searched for ways to dig deeper into the internal storage system. Not everything was within my clearance, but having assisted on multiple projects, before I knew a few backdoors to access certain information. I began comparing Dylan's submitted reports with the original data in the system, and then I found something even more troubling. One market report bore Dylan's name on the file, but in the metadata, the document's properties, the author was listed as Jennifer Walsh. I vaguely recalled that Jennifer had been a former employee who had left over a year ago. My heart tightened. If my instincts were correct, Dylan wasn't just falsifying expenses. He was stealing intellectual work. I sat in the dark, the glow of the screen reflecting against my face. I thought of the insults hurled at me, that I wasn't good enough, not worthy. But what about Dylan? A man who thrived only on borrowing and deceit. Why was he the one celebrated as a genius? I realized I wasn't holding just a handful of small errors. I was staring at a time bomb, a secret that could shatter the very career Dylan and his family so proudly flaunted. And for the first time in years, I felt something rise inside me, not only anger, but determination. I would uncover the entire truth, and when the time was right, I would make sure the world saw their true faces. Chapter 4: Hollow Shells. Ever since I saw Jennifer Walsh's name in the metadata of the report Dylan submitted, I knew I had touched the tip of an iceberg, something far darker than a few fraudulent expense claims. I began spending more time in the compliance office. Under the guise of learning about financial oversight processes, Janet and the others granted me wider access to expense reports, vendor files, and internal reconciliations. I masked my investigation with the humility of a manager eager to learn. But in truth, I was digging deeper into Dylan's trail of evidence. One afternoon, as I opened the vendor payments folder records of company payments to external service providers, I stumbled upon a strange name: Pacific Consulting Solutions. The description read, strategic consulting, each invoice amounting to just under $5,000, conveniently low enough to avoid senior level approval. I kept going. Another name, West Coast Analytics Group. Then another, Mountain View Strategic Services. At first glance, they seemed like small firms specializing in analysis, but all the invoices shared the same structure, identical templates, the same font format, even the same spelling error. Instead of analysis, a few invoices had written analysis. My skin prickled. I looked up the addresses. The result chilled me: a P.O. box in a shopping center, a virtual office in a rental building, and a strip mall storefront. No trace of a real company. Tracing the registration details, I froze when I saw the contact email listed was Dylan's personal address. I sat there in silence for a full minute, my heart pounding. The man praised as a brilliant analyst had created a string of shell companies, funneled payments to himself, and siphoned company funds into his own pocket. The feeling was indescribable, nauseating, infuriating, yet strangely satisfying. For years, my in-laws had trampled on me, claiming my promotion was thanks to lowered standards, and all this time their family pride was living off cheap fraud. I knew one day this truth had to be exposed, but not yet. A handful of invoices wouldn't be enough to destroy Dylan. I needed a complete picture, and then fate seemed to lean in my favor. One morning, Dylan mistakenly sent me a quarterly analysis report. On the surface, it was flawless charts numbers, neatly presented. But when I opened the file properties, the author's name wasn't Dylan. It was Jennifer Walsh, the very same former employee who had left 18 months earlier. My hands trembled. I hurried back into the archives and pulled up Jennifer's old reports. As I suspected, Dylan's submission was nearly identical to her work from 3 years ago, with only a few numbers and dates altered. He wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing the intellectual labor of his colleagues, the very work others had poured sweat and time into. Heat rushed to my face, my whole body burning with fury. I remembered every mocking laugh from Haley, every smirk from Stephanie, every moment Grant sat silently while they belittled me. All their contempt was built on a mountain of lies. That evening at home, I sat in my study with papers, invoices, and printouts spread across the table. A clear picture emerged Dylan had created. Shell companies funneled fake expenses through them and recycled old reports under his name, parading them as his innovations. I had enough evidence to take directly to HR or the audit committee, but I didn't act. Why? Because I remembered Nicole Richardson's gaze at that dinner. Cold, piercing, full of meaning. She knew something, and I was certain she too was waiting for the right moment to strike. If I moved too soon, Dylan might deny everything, even shift the blame onto others. But if I waited, I could make him trap himself and ensure everyone saw his true face. That night, Grant sat in the living room, TV blaring as usual. I heard him call out, "Hey, you've been busy lately. Dylan says you've been hanging around compliance a lot. You're not checking up on him, are you?" I froze. Dylan had noticed me. He wasn't foolish enough not to sense someone following his tracks. I stepped out, forcing a smile. It's just work. I have a lot to learn for my new role. Compliance is part of that. Grant nodded, seemingly unconcerned. But I caught a fleeting hesitation in his eyes. Was he simply curious? Or was he afraid of something? Later that night, when Grant was asleep, I opened my laptop and copied all the evidence into a private cloud folder, protected with dual passwords. I knew then I had entered dangerous territory. From now on, I would have to be more careful than ever. One misstep and everything could turn against me. But I also knew one thing with certainty. I now held the detonator, and one day I would choose the perfect moment to light the fuse. Chapter 5. The revelation about Grant. I once thought the most painful part of marriage was silence. Grant's silence when his family mocked me, his silence when they turned me into a joke at dinners. But I was wrong. The most painful thing was discovering that the man I trusted, the partner I once believed in, was part of the very deception I was trying to expose. It all began on a Friday night. I came home late. Grant was already asleep. In the study, our shared desktop computer was still on the screen glowing. I reached to shut it down when I noticed the printer history. 3 PDF files had been printed 2 weeks ago. Their names were odd. Reference PDF recommendation, Anderson, PDF, Douglas Morrison, and letter, PDF. My heart pounded. I opened the saved copies, and instantly a cold shiver ran down my spine. They were letters of recommendation. Each one praised Dylan Richardson Grant's precious nephew as a genius analyst, an outstanding intern at prestigious firms. The wording was polished, the signatures convincing the company logos professionally formatted. At a glance, anyone would believe them. But I didn't. I was too used to scrutinizing details. Within minutes, I spotted the truth. One of the companies had merged years ago. Another had never existed in any official registry. And the man who supposedly signed one letter, Douglas Morrison, had retired 5 years earlier. I went numb. You didn't need to be an investigator to see it. These were forgeries. I turned back to the computer and checked the browser history. And there it was, undeniable. Grant had visited dozens of sites for downloading company logos, professional templates, even guides on creating digital signatures. He had sat here on nights I thought he was asleep fabricating those recommendation letters. I couldn't believe it. The man I shared a bed with, the husband I once trusted to defend me against his family, was the very person who built Dylan's fraudulent resume to sneak him into Richardson Industries. My hands shook as I printed those letters and hid them in my private file. My chest pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. That entire night I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Grant, listening to his steady breathing, but it felt like lying next to a stranger. Images flashed through my mind, the times he told me not to be too sensitive, when Stephanie mocked me, the times he avoided eye contact, when Haley made her cutting remarks. I once thought that was weakness. But now I understood he never defended me, because he had already chosen his side. Dylan's side, his family's side. The next morning I tested him. Over breakfast, I said softly, "Compliance seems to be checking more closely these days. I hear even recruitment files are being reviewed." Grant looked up. For a split second, his eyes flickered with panic before he masked it with a strained smile. "You worry too much. Paperwork always has mistakes, as long as you have someone on the inside helping things go smoothly." "Someone on the inside?" I asked, feigning casualness. He chuckled weakly, avoiding my gaze. "I'm just speaking generally. Don't overthink it. Just focus on doing your job well." I stayed silent, but inside rage boiled. That answer was as good as a confession. He knew. He was involved. He had made me into a fool fighting every day for honesty at work. While under my own roof, the man closest to me was colluding with the fraud. That afternoon, while Grant was at work, I sent an anonymous email to Jennifer Henderson, a name that appeared in one of the forged letters. I asked whether she had ever written a recommendation for Dylan Richardson. Her reply came within an hour. "No, I've never even heard of Dylan." And during that time, I was working abroad. I sat frozen. It was undeniable. Grant had forged not only companies and signatures, but even the reputations of former colleagues, all to prop Dylan up. A hollow ache spread in my chest, the hollow of broken trust. In 3 years of marriage, I had endured silence, unfairness, contempt from his family. But never had I imagined that Grant himself would betray me like this. That night I sat at my desk, laying out all the evidence before me, the fake invoices, the shell companies, the stolen reports, and now the forged recommendation letters Grant had crafted. Together, they formed a complete picture. Dylan could never have built this scheme alone. He had an accomplice, and that accomplice was the man I once called my husband. I clenched my fists. For the first time in my life, I felt no fear. There was anger, there was pain, but no trembling. I understood then, this battle was no longer just about exposing Dylan. This was about choosing to go on living in lies, or to rise and claim the truth, no matter the cost. And I knew there was no turning back. Chapter 6. The Anonymous Decision. For days. After discovering Grant's hand in the forged letters, I lived in a daze. By day, I went to work, smiled at colleagues, congratulating my promotion, spoke in meetings like a confident manager. But by night, sitting alone in my study, I felt like two different people. One was the wife still sharing a home with her husband, the other the sole witness to a fraud that could bring his entire family crashing down. Sometimes I thought, just let it go. Dylan would trip over his own lies sooner or later. Why should I make myself the troublemaker, the betrayer in my in-laws' eyes? But each time Stephanie's sneer resurfaced in my mind, or Haley's barbed words, or Dylan's smug grin as he took credit in meetings, my chest would ache. I wasn't only angry at them. I was angry at myself, angry for staying silent too long, angry for letting liars bask in glory while I swallowed humiliation. One night, after Grant had gone to bed, I sat in the study, my laptop glowing in the darkness. Spread before me was everything photos of fraudulent invoices, the phantom vendors' metadata proving stolen reports, and the forged recommendation letters bearing Grant's fingerprints all over them. I opened my company email, then closed it again. I knew that if I sent anything from my official account, I'd be exposed immediately. A voice inside whispered, "If you're discovered, they'll turn on you. Dylan will deny it, Grant will disown it, and you'll be trapped in between." I took a deep breath. My palms were slick with sweat. Then I made my decision. I would go anonymous. I walked to a cafe a few blocks from home connected to the public Wi-Fi and tucked myself into a corner seat. My heart thundered as I typed each word. "Dear Mrs. Nicole Richardson," I began. No preamble, no excuses, just the facts. I attached the 3 forged letters along with metadata proving creation dates and IP addresses. I wrote briefly these documents were used in the recruitment process for Dylan Richardson. I believe they merit further investigation. Please examine the origins carefully, including signatures, companies involved, and issue dates. I cannot reveal my identity, but the truth must come to light. I reread it several times. Each word felt like a blade, severing the last ties between me and my husband's family. At last, I hit send. In that moment, fear and relief collided inside me. I knew that once sent, there was no turning back. The machinery of investigation would begin. Dylan would be scrutinized. A Grant would be dragged in, and I would become the unseen shadow behind it all. 3 days later, the air in our house had changed. Grant was taking more phone calls, his voice taut with tension. Each time I asked, he muttered clients or urgent business. But I knew better he was unsettled. Dylan, too, was no longer boasting loudly on the company intranet. Instead, I heard whispers that he'd been summoned to HR multiple times that week. A strange feeling stirred in me, part anxiety, part anticipation. It was like standing just off stage, waiting for the curtain to drop on a grand performance. And I knew this ending would bring people to their knees. That evening, Grant took a call in the living room. I overheard fragments of his furious voice. How could this happen? The documents were supposed to be airtight. No, there's no way it leaked this easily. Who could possibly know? I stood in the kitchen, clutching a cup, my heart aching and cold. He wasn't remorseful. He was only afraid of being caught. That night, I lay still, listening to Grant toss and turn beside me. We shared a bed, but the distance had never been greater. I knew this marriage was fractured beyond repair. And yet, amidst the chaos, I felt something new awaken inside me, a strength I hadn't recognized before. I was no longer the silent wife enduring humiliation. I was the one holding the key to the truth. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I slept deeply, because I knew the wheels of justice had begun to turn, and nothing, not Grant, not Dylan, could stop them now. Chapter 7. Gala. The bomb detonates. The night of the gala came faster than I expected. All week I had lived in a state of waiting, as though perched atop a ticking time bomb. Grant still went to work, but I noticed his unease. His phone never left his ear, his voice tense. As for me, though, I tried to remain calm. A burning certainty simmered inside. Something was about to change. I chose the navy dress, the very one Stephanie had once mocked at a family party. They had said it was too corporate, not suitable for a party, but tonight I wanted to wear it. Not to please anyone, but as armor. I wanted them to see that I no longer needed to fit their approval. The Fairmont Hotel glittered with chandeliers and pristine white tablecloths. I sat at the front at the table reserved for honorees. The feeling was strange. After years of being dismissed, I was now recognized for my own achievements. Yet that pride was overshadowed by the tension of what was to come. I soon spotted Stephanie and Haley at a table near the bar. As always, they were draped in expensive designer clothes. hair perfectly styled, eyes darting judging. When Haley saw me, she curled her lips into a half smile. "Oh, finally making it to a real event, are you?" I only nodded, saying nothing. For the first time, their mockery no longer weighed on me. Dylan never showed. His seat further back remained empty. I guessed he had been summoned for something serious. The thought only stirred my pulse, like waiting for the opening shot of a performance. The evening unfolded with its usual rituals, cocktails, appetizers, long speeches about growth strategy. I listened, but my mind was restless. Every laugh, every clink of glasses felt like a thin veil stretched over a storm ready to tear through. And then it happened. When the final speaker finished, Nicole Richardson, the CEO's wife, unexpectedly rose from her seat. She wasn't on the program tonight yet. Her presence alone silenced the entire ballroom. This was a woman who didn't need a microphone to command attention. Before we conclude this evening, she began, her voice clear and firm. "I must address an urgent matter that has come to the leadership's attention." My heart stilled. Every gaze turned to her. "We take pride in our company's core values: transparency, integrity, and advancement based on true merit." She paused, scanning the crowd, then her tone sharpened like a blade. "Unfortunately, we have recently uncovered evidence of falsified applications, fabricated recommendation letters, and distorted information in the recruitment process." The air dropped heavy like a stone. Stephanie froze mid-sip, her glass trembling in her hand. Haley turned pale, clutching her hands tightly. Nicole placed a pale yellow folder on the podium. "The evidence shows that an employee gained entry into this company through deception, using invalid documents, and exploiting the names of others. That individual has been suspended effective immediately pending full investigation, and anyone complicit in creating these forgeries will face strict accountability." A wave of whispers rippled through the ballroom. Questions buzzed. Who? Could it be? Impossible. I glanced toward my husband's family. Stephanie looked drained of color. Haley's hands shook. For the first time, I saw not arrogance in their eyes, but fear. Beside me, Grant's hand reached for mine, but it wasn't the supportive grasp of old. It trembled, pleading for an anchor. Slowly, I pulled my hand away. Nicole ended with a resounding declaration. "Integrity is the foundation of Richardson Industries. We will not tolerate anyone undermining that trust. No one stands above the rules, and the truth will always come to light." The room fell into stunned silence, as though a bomb had exploded in the midst of the glittering gala. As people began to rise, Stephanie staggered to her feet, nearly stumbling. I caught her lips, mouthing, "No. This can't be. This can't be." Haley kept her head bowed, avoiding every gaze. And me, I sat tall, took a sip of water, and felt for the first time in my life that justice was tipping in my favor. On the ride home, the car rolled past glowing city streets. Grant sat silent. Only after a long time did he speak, his voice hoarse. "Did you know anything about this?" I looked out the window at my reflection in the glass. No longer the silent, suffering woman. Calmly I answered, "I only know one thing. The truth has finally spoken." The car sank into silence, but this silence was different, not the suffocating quiet of old. It was the silence of a man who had lost everything, and of a woman who had just reclaimed herself. Chapter 8. After the storm. Monday morning, the office no longer felt the same. The moment I walked in, I caught the whispers, the quick glances, the unusually careful greetings. No one said it outright, but I knew the news from the gala had spread through every corner of the company. Dylan was nowhere to be seen. His gleaming office, where just a week ago laughter and bragging filled the air, and now sat closed, his computer screen dark. Word was he had been suspended indefinitely. His internal account locked. A compliance team had arrived early to collect his papers, copy his data. As I walked past, I noticed only a company-branded coffee mug left on his desk, a ring of dried coffee clinging to the rim. Such a small detail, yet it struck me the once confident, arrogant man was now nothing more than a shadow disappearing faster than anyone expected. But my satisfaction didn't last long. I knew Dylan was only the surface. Beneath the ice was Grant. By noon, my phone rang. Stephanie's name lit the screen. I hesitated before answering. Her shrill voice exploded immediately. "Are you happy now?" "Dylan's suspended. My whole family is in chaos. Do you think you've won something?" I kept my tone steady. "I haven't won anything." I just watched the truth come out. Stephanie spat back. "Don't pretend to be noble. You've always been jealous of Dylan, a talented, brilliant young man, while you're just someone lucky enough to get a flashy title because your company wanted to look good. You couldn't stand seeing him rise, so you destroyed him." I gripped the phone tighter, but this time I didn't swallow my words. I answered each syllable sharp and clear. "Jealous, think again. I earned my position through my own effort, through sleepless nights, through years of being underestimated. And Dylan, he climbed on forged papers, on lies. If anyone has shamed your family, it's him, not me." There was silence for a beat. Then Stephanie shrieked, "You'll pay for ruining his future." A bitter smile touched my lips. "No, you're mistaken. He's only paying the price for what he did. I simply refuse to let the lies stay hidden." I ended the call. For the first time, I didn't tremble after an encounter with her. Instead, I felt light, like I had severed a chain that had bound me for years. That afternoon, Grant called. His voice was hoarse, like someone who had just been through a battle. I need to talk to you. They've started the investigation. They found emails, documents, and someone said those letters were created from our home computer." I said nothing. My heart ached, but I wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for this moment. "Do you know anything?" Grant asked, his voice shaking. I drew in a slow breath and replied, "I only know that everything you've done has finally come to light." On the other end, silence. I pictured his face, the once confident man so sure of himself, now pale, cornered, terrified. You reported it?" he asked, choking. I didn't answer directly. I only said, "You chose their side, Grant, not mine. And now you're facing the consequences of that choice." A few seconds of silence stretched. Then he hung up. That night the house was heavier than ever. Grant paced the living room, calling Stephanie, calling lawyers, calling Dylan. I overheard fragments of arguments, denials, his voice breaking into angry bursts. I only helped a little. I never thought it would come to this. Meanwhile, I sat in my study reviewing new project plans. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't clouded by anyone's scorn. I had my work, my skills, and the truth on my side. Before bed, I glanced at Grant. He sat slumped in the living room, his face etched with defeat. I felt no pity, no satisfaction, only peace, because I knew at last that the woman who had spent her life in silence had finally reclaimed her voice. Chapter 9. Broken Ties. After the gala and the whirlwind of investigations, our house no longer felt like a home. It was more like a waiting room where both of us knew the train was about to depart, only no one said it aloud. Grant grew sullen, spending hours on the phone with lawyers, snapping whenever anyone mentioned documents or signatures. As for me, I lived in silence, focused on my work, avoiding all collisions. A week passed then, 2. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Next to it lay the house keys. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a few messy lines scrawled across it. "I can't stay here anymore. I'll move in with my brother. I need time to think. I hope you're happy with what you've done. No, I love you. No apology. Just a few cold sentences like an unpaid bill." I stood there staring at the note. A part of me waited for the pain to crash down. But strangely it didn't. Instead, there was a quiet peace, like I had finally slipped out of chains I'd worn for years. That evening, I stepped into our bedroom and looked around. So much in the room was the leather chair he loved, the little wine cabinet, the framed wedding photos in silver frames. I realized that most of this house had never truly been mine. It had always carried his breath, his family's presence. I was just a guest trying too hard to belong. The next day, I began searching for a new place. I didn't want to live surrounded by the heavy shadows of this house anymore. After several days of looking, I found a small loft downtown. High ceilings, raw brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the mornings with light. The realtor said, "It's a bit small for the price." I smiled and replied, "It's enough. What matters is it's mine." On moving day, I brought only what truly belonged to me, a few boxes of books, clothes, and small keepsakes. The wedding photos, the in-laws' wine glasses, I left them all behind. As I sealed the final box, I looked around the old house one last time. There was no regret, only the sense of closing a long, weary chapter and finally finding the courage to turn the page. In the new loft, I kept things simple. In the corner of the living room, I placed an easel. How long had it been since I touched a brush? Perhaps not since I was single, before my dreams were buried under Grant's career and suffocating family dinners. That night, I bought a fresh set of paints, stretched a blank canvas, and sat before it. The first strokes were shaky, but they grew steadier. I painted the sunlight streaming through the tall glass window into the empty room. The painting was far from perfect, but it was mine. Work at the company shifted too. With Dylan gone and whispers of the forged letters spreading, colleagues began to approach me differently. Some murmured quietly, "We always knew you deserved this." Others simply smiled, their eyes filled with respect. No longer was I dismissed as someone who'd risen through diversity policy. I was recognized for real achievement, and that was what I had long craved. In the evenings, returning to my loft, I felt lighter. No heavy phone calls, no suffocating silent dinners with Grant, no watchful in-law eyes. Just me, my easel, and a sky of my own. One night my sister Rachel came over. She looked around and said, "This place is so you. Honest, no pretending. Full of light with its own breath." I smiled. I never thought a home could reflect me so deeply. But Rachel was right. This loft gave me something I hadn't felt in years, the freedom to be myself. Sometimes when I thought of Grant, there was still a flicker of regret, not for love, but for the years I had wasted trying to force a wrong marriage into something right. But then I reminded myself nothing was wasted. Those years, those wounds had taught me how to stand, how to say no, how to take back my life. On a weekend night, I sat by the window, looking out at the city sparkling with lights, a glass of wine in my hand, soft music playing. I exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt it clearly. I was free. Free from my in-laws' control, free from mockery, free from a marriage built on lies, and most importantly, free to begin again, this time for myself. Chapter 10. Rising into the Light. That morning, I received an email from Nicole Richardson. Just a few brief lines. "Please come to the conference room on the 32nd floor at 10 a.m. "There's something important we need to discuss." I sat up straight, my heart pounding. The 32nd floor, home to the executive team, where the company's biggest decisions are made. I had never been invited up there, at least not as an individual. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into a corridor, lined with deep blue carpet and abstract paintings along both walls. Each footstep echoed, underscoring the fact that I was entering a different world. Nicole was waiting in the conference room, sunlight pouring through the windows onto the long wooden table. Beside her were several board members. I tried to steady my breathing, though my hands trembled slightly as I set them on the table's edge. Nicole looked directly at me, her voice calm but formal. "We've reviewed the entire situation, from the results you've delivered to the way you handled the matter involving Dylan and the personal hardship that came with it. The board has reached a decision." I swallowed, bracing myself. "We'd like to appoint you as Senior Strategic Analyst, reporting directly to the CEO and coordinating global projects. This is not a reward for exposing fraud. It is recognition of your true capability." For a moment, I could hardly believe my ears. All the years spent in the shadows, the long nights I typed in place of Grant, the times my in-laws sneered that I'd just gotten lucky, it all came flooding back. But this time I didn't cry. I simply smiled and nodded. I accept. They handed me the appointment packet along with a new salary significantly higher. More importantly, they handed me an opportunity, the chance to stand on my own feet with no need to hide behind anyone's name. On my first day in the new office, I walked through a wooden door with a gleaming nameplate engraved with my own. The room was spacious glass walls opening to a full view of the city. I sat in the leather chair, ran my hand over the cool surface of the desk, and whispered to myself, "At last, this is where I belong." That afternoon, I called a meeting with the analysis team. Present was Sarah Martinez, the colleague Grant had always dismissed. I looked her in the eye. "I've read your report. It's excellent. I want you to lead the Europe project." Her eyes widened, her voice catching. "Really, Mr. Mitchell always said I was impractical." "He was wrong," I said simply. "You can do this." In her eyes, I saw my younger self, the one underestimated and sidelined, and that made me all the more determined to change things. In the weeks that followed, I launched a mentorship program for women in the company. I listened as they told me about male colleagues taking credit for their work about projects where their names were erased from the report about ideas repurposed set in someone else's voice. Each story was a blade reminding me I was not alone, and I had to do more than just live for myself. One evening, Nicole invited me to dinner. In the warm light, she said, "You know what impressed me most about you wasn't the numbers. It was how you stayed composed, how you refused to let hatred drive you. That's the mark of a true leader." I answered softly, "Maybe because I spent too many years living in resentment. Now I just want to live truthfully." She smiled. "Then you will go very far." Then came the annual conference. This time I wasn't a spectator. I stood on stage before hundreds of employees, microphone in hand. I began with the question, "How many of you have ever felt your voice being ignored?" Nearly half the hands went up. A murmur rippled through the room. I took a breath and continued. "I spent 15 years working in the dark, letting others take credit for what I wrote. I sat through dinners where I was introduced as the one who keeps the kitchen and the bed, while the $1 million plans I produced had my name torn off. I paused, letting the silence stretch. The room settled into a shared understanding. But eventually I said, I learned this. No one gets to define your worth except you. Your work has value. Your voice has value. And it's time we defend that together." Applause thundered, rolling across the hall. In the front row, I saw Nicole nodding. A few female colleagues wiped away tears. I knew this moment wasn't just for me, it was for everyone who had ever been diminished the way I had. As I stepped off the stage, a young woman approached me, eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. "I thought I was just a shadow, but hearing you, I feel like I have the right to stand up." I squeezed her hand. "Don't ever forget, we're not shadows. We are the light." That evening, back at my new apartment, I opened the windows to the glittering city. Inside were my unfinished paintings, a tidy desk, a new life taking shape. I sat down, poured a glass of wine, took a sip, and smiled. Grant was gone, taking with him all the old chains. Dylan was facing the courts. Stephanie had disappeared from the noisy dinner parties. And me, I was living, breathing, and most importantly, free. Looking back on the journey, I understood my greatest victory wasn't the promotion, nor watching them fall. My greatest victory was finally finding my own voice, and this time I will never be silent again. Looking back on my journey, I realized my greatest victory wasn't the new position, nor watching the deceivers be exposed. The true victory was finding myself again. I was no longer the woman who quietly wrote success stories for someone else. I became the one standing on stage, called by my own name, heard and respected. And perhaps the message I want to leave behind is simple. You don't need anyone's permission to shine. Your worth has never depended on someone else's gaze. Remember, you are not a shadow. You are the light. If this story resonated with you, make sure to share your most satisfying moment in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Scarlet Vows for more true Reddit stories and revenge stories.